Peace and welcome, everyone. I'm Aisha Musa of AIM Education and Consulting. In this video, we'll be talking about marriage, sexuality, and the people of Lot. In my previous video on this topic, we looked at Hadith literature. In this video, we'll be looking at the Quran. As we saw in the previous video on sexuality in Hadith literature, the primary distinction for Muslims is between lawful and unlawful sexual activity. The Quran uses two terms to refer to unlawful sexual activities, fahisha and zina. The first is a general term that refers to anything foul and abominable. According to the lexicographer Ibn Mandur, it can refer to both words and actions. The root fahishin appears nearly 24 times in the Quran, and most occurrences support this general understanding. The term zina refers specifically to fornication and adultery. The two terms are directly linked in Quran 17:32, which commands believers to avoid zina, calling it a fahisha. There are two verses that lay the foundation for understanding what constitutes lawful sexual activity. These are chapter 23, verses 5 and 6, and chapter 70, verses 29 and 30. These verses speak of those who guard their genitals, except from azwājihim, their mates' spouses, or ma malakat aymanuhum, which I'm translating here as those whom their covenants authorize. Now let's take a look at this specific terminology. The first of the two terms used to describe lawful sexual partners in Quran chapter 23 verse 6 and chapter 70 verse 30 is azwāj. This is the plural of the noun zawj, which means spouse or mate. In the Quran, we find the term zawj closely linked to another term, nafs, soul, self, or person. An example of this linkage is found in Quran chapter 4, verse 1, which tells us that God created all of humanity from a single nafs, and from her created her zawj. The second term used to describe lawful sexual partners in Quran 23:6 and Quran 70:30 is ma malakat aymanuhum. Let's take a detailed look at this phrase. The first word of the phrase is ma, a pronoun meaning what. The verb malakat means to own, possess, govern, or have authority over something. The noun ayman is the plural of yamin, literally meaning the right side. This phrase is often translated what their right hands possess. But the noun ayman throughout the Quran is used to mean oaths, as we see in 1691, which tells believers not to break their oaths after affirming them. Western secular culture also has a similar concept of shaking the right hand to seal a promise and raising the right hand to take an oath. Considering the meaning of the individual words, a more literal translation of the phrase ma malakat aymanuhum is what their oaths or promises govern. Further context for understanding this phrase is found in other Quranic discussions of marriage. For example, Quran 4:21 says that spouses have taken a solemn covenant, mithaqan ghalizan. Quran 2:235 refers to the knot of marriage, uqdatan nikah. In Islamic law, mithaq and uqda refer to agreements entered by taking an oath, yamin, plural, ayman. Again, we find similar concepts are shared by the Western secular tradition of wedding vows and the idiomatic reference to marriage as tying the knot. It's clear from the Quran that what makes sexual activity lawful is the contract of marriage. Now, let's take a look at what the Quran says about the purposes of marriage. We find the primary purpose of spouses or mates explicitly stated in Quran chapter 30, verse 21. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلْنَا بَيْنَكُم مَّوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً إن في ذلك لآيات لقوم يتفكرون. Among his signs is that he has created for you from among yourselves spouses or mates, so that you may settle down with them, and has put loving affection and mercy between you. In that are signs for people who think. Let's take a look at some key terminology from Quran 30:21. The verb sakana taskun means to rest, to be calm, to be at peace, to settle down, and to live. The noun muwadda comes from the root waw dal dal, which has the meaning of to feel love or affection. And the noun muwadda means loving affection. The noun rahma comes from the noun raham, the Arabic word for womb, and is generally understood as mercy or compassion because that's a quality that's associated with the womb. Thus, Quran 30:21 shows us that the primary purpose of spouses is to settle down together in a relationship of loving affection. People often consider procreation to be a primary purpose of spousal relationships. But in Quran chapter 7, verse 189, we find that procreation is described as a consequence of heterosexual sex. And this is mentioned after a restatement of the primary purpose for which the spouse has been made, to settle down, the yaskun. The Quran uses two terms to describe lawful sexual partners: azwāj, spouses or mates, and ma malakat ayman, what covenants authorize or what promises govern. The Quran's detailed overall discussions of spouses and marriage show that what makes sex lawful is a solemn covenant of loving friendship between mature people who are not closely related by step-parentage, blood, or mother's milk. The story of Lot serves as the primary basis for condemning homosexuality and denying the possibility of same-sex marriage in Muslim thought, doctrine, and law. Let's look at what the Quran says about the actions of Lot's people. Lot harshly rebukes his people for committing fahisha. When he does so, he specifies that the fahisha includes ta'tuna rijal shahwatan min dun nisa. This is usually translated as, you approach men lustfully rather than women. The prepositional phrase min duni is most often understood to mean rather than or instead of in this context. However, this is only one possible meaning of the phrase, as indicated by its usage in the Quran. It can also mean besides or in addition to, as we see in Quran 39:45, which speaks of those who are averse when God alone is mentioned, but are pleased when those besides or in addition to him are mentioned. The story of Lot found in chapters 26 and 29 provides further information about the fahisha being committed by Lot's people. Do you approach the males of the nations and cast aside what your Lord has created for you from your spouses? Nay, you are a hostile people. Quran 26, 165 and 166. These verses raise two important issues. First, they suggest that the people of Lot had spouses, whom they left to sexually pursue men of other nations. Second, it speaks of what your Lord created for you from your spouses. Ma khalaqa lakum rabbukum min azwājikum. As we saw in looking at Quran 30:21, spouses have been created for the purpose of settling down in a relationship of loving friendship and grace, muwadda wa rahma. Quran 29:29 gives us even more information about what the people of Lot were doing. When Lot asks his people, do you approach men, cut off the highway, and do reprehensible things in your assemblies? This shows us that Lot's people were doing far more than approaching males lustfully. The story of Lot's guest, told in Quran chapters 11 and 15, gives further insight on the way Lot's people were behaving and the effect it had on Lot. When our messengers came to Lot, he was distressed on their account. Feeling unable to protect them, he said, "This is a terrible day." His people came rushing to him, and they had previously been doing evil deeds. Quran 11:77 and 78. He said, "These are my guests, do not shame me. Beware of God and do not disgrace me." Quran 15:68 and 69. These verses clearly portray Lot as afraid for the safety of his guests and distressed by his own inability, as a host, to protect them from the mob that has come rushing to confront him. To sum up, there's a clear contrast between marriage and the behavior of Lot's people as described in the Quran. The Quran describes marriage as a solemnly contracted spousal relationship of loving friendship that makes sexual intimacy lawful, while it describes the behavior of Lot's people as leaving their spouses and sexually assaulting men of other nations, and rushing to attack Lot's guests, causing Lot great distress and shame. The Quran does not describe Lot's people as seeking to enter loving, solemnly contracted same-sex marriages. These are two very different things. The behavior of Lot's people has nothing to do with same-sex marriage. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like and subscribe. If you want to know more about me and my work, you'll find a link to my website in the description.